Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are keeping calm. We're staying local, and nothing more local and near and dear to Don Moeller's heart than Sarah Hemminger of Thread. We are into a full-on pandemic here in Baltimore City, and all of the issues that we had before the pandemic are here, and in addition to folks staying inside and commerce and maybe unemployment going to 30%. Don, I know you wanted to reach back to a lot of our friends who are doing great work here in the best of conditions, in the best of times economically and otherwise, and the underserved and some challenged places. And I know you take Thread real seriously. It's your favorite.
It is my favorite. And before I introduce our guest, I just want to thank, again, all of our sponsors who are really going through tough times right now. We've got State Fair, still doing carry-out in Catonsville. Give them a call. Brunch, lunch, dinner. Evan Brown, Keith Holsey, great friends at State Fair. Support them. Our friends at Fadley's. Unfortunately, the Lexington market has been shut down. The good news is their world-famous crab cakes can still ship locally or all over the world. Go on the Fadley's website, click the shop button, get their crab cakes. And again, our newest sponsor, Jeff Moeller and Moeller and Gary Realtors, they're still operating through this. They're Skyping, they're Facebooking, they're making it happen. So if you're looking to buy or sell this spring, give Jeff a call, 410-746-1547. It is a pleasure to welcome back Sarah Hemminger, the director of Thread. And Sarah, as Nestor said, anybody that listens to Baltimore Positive knows that we are indeed your number one fans and the work that you're doing. So thanks for coming back with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sarah, Nestor and I were talking the other day, and I think there are these untold stories at a time like this for organizations like yours. And again, I'm going to ask you to sort of educate folks again as to what Thread is and the great work that you're doing, creating what you call a new social fabric in Baltimore City. And all of a sudden, I'm imagining that social fabric is being interrupted. And I can't imagine what that feels like. So I'm going to ask you straightforward, what is happening? What does it feel like? And how are you trying to make do through all this?
Yeah, it's been just an overwhelming experience in many different ways, but I would actually say the social fabric has gotten stronger through this. For those who don't know what Thread is or what we do, we enroll high school freshmen who rank academically in the bottom 25% of their class their freshman year. And then once they're enrolled in Thread, they stay with us for 10 years, so all of high school and 6 years after. And then during that time, they have up to 4 volunteers who, the way to think of it is they do what you would do for your own children. So it might be packed lunches or rides to school or tutoring after school or going to an O's game. So our work is really centered around building deep and permanent relationships across lines of difference in Baltimore City. And so as this is all kind of unfolded, we went into emergency response mode once we realized the colleges and universities were going to be moving to remote, and also anticipating the potential closure of city schools. We wanted to make sure that we had in place a response that was consistent with the value of what would you do for your own family? What would you do for your own child? So we quickly kicked into a mode where we began contacting all of the students in Thread and all of the volunteers, first and foremost, just to ask them the simple question, like, are you okay? Everyone was going through a variety of different things from, food insecurity to having to move out of dorms unexpectedly, to loss of jobs. And so just starting with the, are you okay was critical for us. And very then quickly realized that what many of us were doing as human beings to be okay in the last 2 weeks was we were making sure we had enough groceries, making sure that in order to maintain social distancing, that we would have the ability to choose whether or not to leave our house, that we wouldn't be forced out to go and get meals, that we could have enough groceries to sustain us. And so then our approach was the same with our Thread family, is making sure that each of our students and their families had access to not just meals, but 2 weeks worth of groceries that could sustain them through this initial phase.
Sarah, I'm going to ask you this because I had not been on your LinkedIn, and I see you around town in all sorts of ways and places and doing good work, but I kid you a little bit about this, but at heart you're the PhD nerd, biomedical engineering. I don't even know what that is, and you came to Johns Hopkins. Is there part of this thing being a virus and a plague and a pandemic that there's some deeper understanding you had of the potential of this a month or two or three ago, based on the fact that you're sort of a genius science person and thinking about these things? I think the hardest part for anyone in our society is just getting a grasp on something you can't see and something that you could contract asymptomatically. Most people don't know what asymptomatic is. I think we're all relearning some of these things. But for you, was there something about this over the last 60 days that you saw it on the news and it worried you a little bit, knowing that maybe you have a little bit of background to understanding that these bad things can get a lot worse very quickly when science is involved and people that don't understand science have to suddenly wear a mask, wash their hands, do things that feel awkward to most human beings, let alone Americans, right?
Yeah, I don't think my scientific background has helped me predict better than most. I do think, actually, ironically, the fact that I've had a lot of different health challenges during my adult life, and then also been through a lot of trauma in my childhood, I think that has actually helped me to, just as a person, really engage in the situation in a way that's full of hope and with a lot of intention. And so really focusing in on what I can control inside of Thread, what can be controlled inside of my own home and my family, what can we control, and then just understanding that part of life is so much is outside of our control, and the best we can do is to go through it together and to utilize, whether it's like incredible things happening or very devastating things happening, it is an opportunity to get to know one another more deeply. It's in those vulnerable moments where you actually find each other and find yourself. And so I think that's the thing that's been most helpful, is not coming from a place of fear or panic, but just intentionality and with a focus on the people in my life and the people in Thread. And it's just in some ways been a beautiful experience, as difficult as many aspects of this are and will continue to be.
Well, I think the hardest part is the why, right? I mean, I'm thinking along the lines of a 14, 15, 16-year-old person who has the challenges they have in your organization. Just saying why and trying to understand how the virus works in a community where a lot of folks don't read, right? I mean, all of these issues, the educational part of why do I need to do that? We have red states all over the country don't think they need to do it. I mean, down on the beaches, and I just read the Mississippi governor. I just think there needs to be an understanding in every part that this thing's over my science head, right? And it's taken me a lot to really understand that we could all be wearing masks in a few weeks around here, because all my friends in Italy and China have gone through that in the last couple of weeks, and that's part of keeping people safe. I would think there's a safe part of this for the whole community, that someone like you having a real lifeline into communities to educate communities, that this is the most important part of educating people who, quite frankly, there's a lot of college-educated people out there running around touching things, thinking that this is going to be okay. And I guess that's why I brought it up, is the educational part of safety for everyone's sake in regard to the virus itself.
It's so funny you mention that. The biggest pain point I've had in the last couple of weeks has been my own mother. She's very educated. She used to be a teacher. She's retired, but she just loves to go out and run errands. She's just always all over the place. And, she's in her 70s, and my father just had surgery for colon cancer. And I'm like, Mom, can you please just stay home? So I think oftentimes it has less to do with education, and it has more to do with how do you interpret the information that's coming your way. I've had, young people in Thread, message me and say, hey, Sarah, are you doing the social distancing? And I'm like, of course. And they're like, oh, good, me too. So I think it's different personalities actually are experiencing it differently. I think there's a widespread of information. It's and not just personalities, but drives. I'm sitting here thinking, man, this is an introvert hermit, like, it's like my haven. I'm on my porch.
You're getting stuff done.
Taking walks. Yeah. Obviously I don't think COVID-19 is a positive thing, but I'm just saying the way that it's impacting me is very different than, say, my mother, who really craves being out and around people. And so I think it's about, like, how do you meet the emotional needs of people for whom this might be the most difficult. Also, I have some family members who, for example, my sister lives by herself. That's a different experience than if you're living with a partner, with children. Her children happen to be grown. So I think the best that we can do is try to create space for people to talk about these things. And I think, some of the advice we've been given, not just with young people in Thread, but, the way I've been engaging my own daughter is sometimes it's hard for people to put in words, especially young people, like what this experience amounts to for them. And so sometimes just creating a space by, instead of asking a direct question, just playing a board game or doing something else, it opens up the opportunity to talk about it. And that's when you can, like, slide in there, like, do you wash your hands for 45 seconds with hot water?
While you sing happy birthday. You made me laugh with the extrovert, introvert. You and I chatted about it. When we were together, and I'll tell the story. I want to remind folks we are with Sarah Hemminger, Executive Director of Thread, thread.org. Sarah spent almost 2 hours with us a few months back, episodes 56, 55, 56, and 57. We were going to talk for about an hour. We spent almost 2 hours because, as Nestor said, we were totally blown away by the good work that you are doing. But you mentioned extrovert, introvert. My wife is very much like you, and I can still remember, I tell the story often, when I took that famous Myers-Briggs test, and the evaluator laughed out loud when he was reading me my results. And I said, well, what's the matter? He said, I don't know that I've ever seen this. I said, well, what have you never seen? He said, you didn't get 1 eye point. I don't know that I've ever seen anyone not get 1 eye point. So you're right. For an extrovert, this social distancing, my daughter texted my wife the other day, and she said, Mom, just checking on Dad. This has to be hell for him. And pretty much.
You got FaceTime, though, and grandkids you can talk to. So.
Lord, no. This is crazy. Sarah, I go back. We talked when we were together months ago. A great David Brooks article in the New York Times. And for those of you listening, go look up David Brooks' New York Times thread. Wrote a great article on the work that Sarah and her group is doing. And what jumped at me at that time, and still does, is his point that when you look at Thread, you can't tell who's giving and who's receiving. And I'm wondering if in this time, is that more true than ever during a time like this? And are your mentors or your family members, are they getting as much back from the kids? Because I'm thinking that the kids are probably reacting in a way that makes you all very, very proud.
Yeah, it's been interesting. We've actually this week, we had one of our volunteer leadership meetings and had the highest attendance we've had all year. Obviously, it was a virtual meeting, but I think it has been very, very difficult for many of our volunteers. Many of them are college and university students, and so they've been uprooted in the middle of a semester. Many of them are working professionals whose workplace has been turned upside down by this new environment and might be, working from home now, but have 3 children that they're also caring for who are out of school. So what we've seen is just in some ways our young people in Thread, have some aspects that are far more stable in their lives than some of our volunteers at the moment. And that has been a real comfort and resource. And again, I think for us, the real deep work happens in the relationships when it's the young person, when they, have been told that they're disadvantaged, told that they're marginalized, and all of a sudden they find themselves being the helper and being the person that the adult, is leaning on. It's an identity-changing thing, and it's something that we obviously are seeing happen throughout this time period as well. And, I've had it personally, just talking to so many of the alumni who I have very close relationships with. I think part of what has been helpful to me is they're like, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. So there's a resilience in our young people. They've been through so much, and so their perspective on a pandemic, I think, is in many ways maybe a healthier one than the average perspective.
Because they've been through so much. Sarah, update our listeners, if you will, because I always love hearing about the numbers and how many young people you've worked with. You've been at it now for about 15 years, if I remember. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, about 15 years. How many young folks have come through the program during that time?
So we currently are working with 608 young people and their families. We were in the middle of enrolling this year's cohort of students when all of this broke open. So we've also just enrolled 128 new students who are in very nascent relationships with a group of new volunteers. So a lot of our energy is also being focused in just making sure that the newer relationships stick and that they find ways to connect virtually in a kind of new normal.
And you have to continue to find volunteers. Now, I'm hoping that as people, again, are sitting at home listening to this or riding around in their car, they're going, Don and Nestor talk about Thread all of the time. I need to find out more, or I need to contact somebody about whether or not I can volunteer. How can they do that if they're thinking that right now while they're driving around?
They can reach out to us. We absolutely are continuing to welcome new volunteers. We are continuing to have orientations and trainings, and it is in another way, once you've worked through your whole Netflix backlog, it's a really great way to connect with people. And so you just reach out to volunteer@thread.org. And then there's also other ways to help. So we've been really, really fortunate to be able to work with New Psalmist Baptist Church. They have been doing Pantry on the Go. So as we look forward and think about how do we sustainably create mechanisms for groceries when that need potentially continues, they've been doing that for the community as a whole, and are going to have another Pantry on the Go free food distribution this March 28th from 11:30 to 1:03. It's a drive up at 6020 Marion Drive. So that's another way to get involved. We've been really fortunate. Horseshoe actually donated yesterday 7 pallets of wonderful fresh food, and New Psalmist received it because they have a really large building and a large kitchen and capacity there, and then are going to distribute it. So if you're interested in donating food or helping with the distribution of that food, you can also contact Reverend Al Bailey at abailey, ABAILEY at newpsalmist.org.
That'd be perfect. And maybe Nestor and I can get the Reverend on and have him talk about that program. Can folks also make contributions to Thread. Sarah, they're driving around and they say, I'm not sure I can volunteer, but boy, I'd love to donate and help the organization out. Do you all accept donations as well?
We do, and we actually had an incredibly generous partner who is going to match up to $100,000 any donations we receive during this time. So, we do have some expenses that are different than they were 2 weeks ago, and so that's also a way to help that is greatly appreciated.
I'm going to tell everybody about Thread. Thread.org is the way to find Sarah Hemminger. Of course, Don Moeller's here. We're doing the Baltimore Positive thing. Nothing more local. This is all local, correct, Sarah? Thread.
Correct, yes.
Thread harnesses the power of relationships to create a new social fabric of diverse individuals deeply engaged with young people facing the most significant opportunity and achievement gaps. Our community is committed to ending social isolation and building a more equitable culture in which everyone thrives. Crazy we're talking about ending social isolation. We're all isolated, Sarah. But we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. Appreciate all that you do. Always love having you back on and we're bringing all the alums on, the Baltimore Positive alumni this spring, because we're all in it together here during this pandemic. Please stay safe. Keep all your people safe, and we'll get out this the other side and have us a summer here in Baltimore, all right?
Thank you, and thank you for all that you do for our Baltimore community. We really appreciate all of the positivity and appreciate all that you've done to support the city through this.
Thread.org, the way to find that. You can find Don Moeller and I up at BaltimorePositive.com. Johnny O going to join us this week. We're talking health and human services as well as food chains of all things with Tim Bojanowski of Zest. Big thanks to State Fair. Big thanks to Fadley's. Get some crab cakes, ship them. Get some curbside over at State Fair, and make sure you give our friends at Moeller and Gary Realty some love, and Jeff Moeller as well. They're doing virtual closings now. All that stuff, they can still get it done. Trying to make the world work here. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net. Keep calm. Stay local. Wash your hands, Sarah and Don. We're going to stay Baltimore positive through all of this.